everybody. Welcome back to the Coleman's Theatre at the Rotary Arts Centre in Brook, Newfoundland. Today I am joined by the lovely Andrew Testa, artist and arts educator, community arts organizer, and just all-around talented dude. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Aley.
Yeah, it's great to meet you. We actually met probably about a year ago at a baby shower.
Yeah.
So it's nice to meet you in this new context. I'd heard so much about you and your partner, Michelle, as well as artists in the community.
Yeah.
And I was actually saying to you yesterday, I just sort of made that connection. So it's really great to sit down and talk today about what you've been working on and what your plans are. Would you be able to just sort of kind of introduce yourself and tell us what led you here and sort of what your practice is a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks.
I'm an artist and educator, as you mentioned, and I originally grew up in the Ontario area, just outside of Toronto, where I did my schooling at York University.
Cool.
And I'm a printmaker by trade. So I work through printmaking processes, and that's what I teach up at the university. Cool. And printmaking is a very kind of nutshell version of it is you take something and you apply pressure to it onto something else, and you make a translation or impression onto this other surface. So I think a lot about kind of the notions of translation within my art practice. So a lot of the things that I'm doing within printmaking is thinking about what it means to make those translations in a very direct sense, but also kind of thinking about translations in a more theoretical space. So for instance, one of the questions that I have right now in my research practice is, what does a mutual and nurturing conversation with other than human things look like? So for instance, if I were to talk to a rock, how do you do that, and what is the kind of the process? So again, thinking about kind of a translation in that sense. So that's what I do within my art practice.
Cool. It's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's kind of fun. It's a little weird.
Yeah.
I think some people will find it weird. I'll often dress up in camo clothes to try to be a rock, to speak to a rock
Nice.
in a sort of comical way. And part of that is, I find if I add a layer of comedy to it, people are more accepting, and they'll approach me to converse about it, opposed to me being weird in a standoff way. They'll actually be like, "Oh, what are you doing?"
Yeah.
So I find that works out kind of cool.
That's awesome.
And then coming to Newfoundland, there was a job here. But when I was first doing my MFA studies, one of the processes that I worked through was traditional photographic gravure printmaking processes, and two of the professors at Grenfell wrote a book about it. So I studied their book when I was learning about it at York University.
Oh, cool.
And then a job came up here, and I was familiar with the campus because of their book.
Right.
So that was Dave and Marlene, who recently retired a number of years ago. And a job came up, and I happened to get it, and I've loved every minute of it since.
That's amazing. How long have you been here?
I believe we got here, my partner and I got here in 2016, and we've been here on and off on contract, and recently I got a tenure track position at the university.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so
Congratulations.
thank you very much.
That's really cool.
Very excited about that. But yeah, so we've been here for a bit, traveled around in between. I spent a little bit of time in Kamloops in British Columbia, a little bit of time in Sault Ste. Marie in Ontario, and then kind of happened back in Brook.
Great. Okay, cool. Well, we're really lucky to have you. That's I've heard sort of about your art practice, but also I know you've done some collaborative stuff here at the RAC with students and student work. Can you just tell us a little bit about that process?
Yeah. So the things that I've done at the RAC, I've curated a number of shows with some of our alumni at the Grenfell program or recent students. And it's really an opportunity, I'm so privileged to be able to teach at a university, and I try to give back as much as I can. And finding ways to engage our student body with the kind of really vibrant and exciting art scene in Brook is one of those ways that I try to kind of just engage them and kind of really get them excited about what's going on here. So early on, when I first started my stay at Grenfell, I reached out to the Rotary Arts Centre, and they and we kind of figured out a way to have an exhibition where I curated a show of student work, recent grads as well as current students. And since then, it's been an ongoing process on a fairly yearly basis. Cool. And yeah, it's always a really exciting thing to do and kind of introduce students to sort of the professional practices along with being an artist. So not just about making the work and thinking about making, about display and how all those things go. And we'll do studio visits with them. So getting them ready for kind of the beyond the undergraduate process.
That's awesome. That's really important, I think,
Yeah.
sort of bridging the practical and the sort of artistic process. I know that Grenfell is working towards starting a master's program that sort of overlaps this. I won't talk too much about it, but you probably
Yeah, well, so the
that.
MFA program, we've had our second cohort through. I believe it started officially 3 years ago now. But yeah, it's really wonderful to have students studying at the master's level alongside the undergraduate level.
Totally.
Because
yeah.
it is one of those ways of bridging. For undergraduate students, it's so amazing to have them kind of exposed to what students are doing at a master's level.
Yeah.
And it's also a way to bring folks from around Canada and internationally, as well as kind of, we've had a couple of local artists or people living in Corner Brook taking that program, and that's always really wonderful to see too.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, and it's such a beautiful building and beautiful space. I know a couple of people who are sort of completing their degrees there now. See, one of them, Jessie Donaldson, who,
Yep.
yeah, I'm probably going to interview her soon as well. She's a great artist. So how do you, when, in your experience of sort of collaborating here with using the space of the RAC and taking the students away from the campus and sort of bringing them more into the community, I assume that some of the students are probably from here, some of them might be from other provinces, and some might be from smaller communities in Newfoundland.
Yeah.
Did you get any sort of feedback on what that might have felt like for them?
Well, so what happens I find in university settings is there is a little bit, it's kind of insular at times, where it's really wonderful, especially at Grenfell, where it's a small cohort of students, where it becomes this kind of tight-knit community.
Yeah.
And because of that, there's a lot of support and excitement within that space. But sometimes it's hard to kind of break out of that space. And when I first started at the university, I was trying to find more ways to kind of engage them and break them out, so that way they already had connections with the community members, mm-hmm. and that they were able to kind of participate in the arts community as active artists while they're kind of going through their undergraduate degree. It's always just been met with excitement and kind of looking at the existing artists that are in our community and doing so many wonderful things and kind of having a chance to participate alongside them.
Totally.
Yeah, which has always been such a wonderful thing. I know when I was in my undergraduate, one of the things that I always found weird was at what point when you're a student, do you consider yourself like a quote unquote artist?
Right, yeah, that's a good question.
And I find that opportunities like this kind of, it's not the point that they become an artist, but rather something that gives them confidence to say that they're an artist and claim it for themselves, and that you don't necessarily need to finish a BFA or have that kind of education to take on that space and that title, and that you can be that at any point.
Totally.
So I find breaking out of the university and bringing them to a community kind of just shows them that world, and kind of, again, it's just an opportunity for them to share their work with others and to start to mingle and make connections.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I mean, for sure, sort of breaking into the community side of the art world. I don't know a lot about it, but I was living in Toronto for a long time, so it's a whole other sort of thing there as well. But yeah, it can be really daunting, and that is often sort of a difficulty of some arts degrees, where you learn so much about the practice itself, but not sort of how to translate it into the community. So, I mean, having that here is really helpful probably for them, and also just great for everyone here. People want to see what people are making.
Yeah.
I feel like there's often, it's these two sides, and it's sort of merging them together is, everybody wants that in one way or another.
Yeah. And something to say is it is something that's always happened, and it's just about finding kind of more and more opportunities to kind of make those areas mingle. And for me, that also kind of extends beyond Corner Brook and looking at Newfoundland and Labrador at large too. So I'm the chair of St. Michael's Printshop, which is located in St. John's, and one of the things that really drew me to participating within an artist-run center on the opposite side of the island was to make sure that there was kind of a way that I can integrate the students into that kind of artist community.
Cool. That's great for them. That's
yeah, so
really-
it's an opportunity. Like there's a course that we teach out of there, an independent studies course over the summer. So a student will have a chance to kind of create work through St. Michael's. And yeah, it just, the more students know about what's going on and kind of seeing the existing connections, and the easier it is to remove those barriers, the better for kind of the arts and culture scene in Newfoundland and Labrador at large.
Totally, and also bridging sort of, I mean, one thing I've talked a lot about with people, guests who are sort of more in the music side of things is the sense of bridging the East and the West Coast in terms of this more holistic sort of gestalt of artistic ability within the province. And I think everything is sort of veering towards that within the province. I know last week I was talking to Nigel, and he was telling me, like, he's the chair of the Board of Music and L, for example, and he was telling me that, you know, they're sort of trying to consider a lot more, in the past, a lot more grants and things have gone into St. John's more directly, and they're really trying to see the province kind of at large. I think that, and I'm curious what you think about this, but I feel like COVID has sort of pointed to the necessity of that in a way too, because everything has sort of become geographically disjointed.
Yeah.
And sort of an artistic conversation generally seems to have melded more so into this, I don't know if I would say global, but like this larger sphere. Do you feel like that's been happening, or?
Yeah, like I feel like what's happened is, like, even so within my teaching practice, for instance, and within kind of my work at St. Michael's Printshop, there's so many more opportunities to bring folks in virtually from anywhere in the world.
Totally, yeah.
And that's a really exciting thing to do because it makes the world feel a lot smaller. But one of the things I noticed in the beginning portion of the pandemic was we were constantly reaching to like beyond the community because we had this opportunity to bring people in virtually. Which then later emphasized for me and for others the need to like make sure that we're not forgetting the communities that we're in, and making sure that we're connecting kind of rural spaces from across Newfoundland and Labrador, and looking to all the wonderful things that are going on within places like Port Union at Union House Arts, and just everywhere kind of that isn't just that east and west area, or the two larger city centers in Newfoundland and Labrador.
Totally, yeah. I mean, you actually, can you, you mentioned sort of this residency that you have planned at Port Union, which sounds really cool. Can you sort of explain that a little bit more? Thanks.
So this spring, it's a collaborative residency between myself, my partner Michelle McKinnon, and a local Indigenous artist, Kelsey Street.
Nice.
And the three of us are going out to Union House Arts, and we're looking at kind of what it means to have, not necessarily make things to within an artistic practice as with the goal of the end in mind, but rather kind of the process of making and the process of sharing that knowledge of like how it is to make. And so what we're doing is we're going out there and we're going to kind of advertise when we're going to be in the studio making, and invite anyone to come along and make alongside of us.
Cool.
And all of us will have enough materials for a couple of folks to kind of join us along the way. So it's not necessarily like workshops in the larger sense, but at any point someone can come in and, so for instance, I'm going to be spoon carving, so with an axe and a knife and a piece of wood, and I'll have enough things for a couple of folks to join me, and if they want to make a spoon alongside me, they're more than welcome to do that. And with Kelsey, they can do some beadwork, and with Michelle, she'll be doing some drawing in watercolor.
Awesome.
And yeah, it's really just a way to kind of engage in that conversation and kind of the joys of process and kind of learning something new. And the hope of the residency is that in exchange for us kind of sharing something that we're excited about making and doing, that someone would be willing to share something back. And so, for instance, it could be how to give the world's best hug, or it could be like maybe they have a particular dish that they really like to make and they want to share how the process of baking. So there's no kind of expectation of what is shared, but just the fact that the exchange of knowledge is just something really exciting to kind of participate in.
Yeah, that's so nice. I mean, I think that there's something interesting within that as well, where like I think through the pandemic, lots of people have taken it upon themselves to learn things that they might never have had the time, or
Well, and that's how I started spoon carving, was at the beginning of the pandemic. It was weird to make art, not only because I was disjointed from the studio and couldn't be in the printmaking studio, but I didn't know why I was making art at that time.
Totally.
And my family's all in Ontario, and I started making spoons because I wanted to send them something that they can use to kind of be close to them.
Nice.
So it was like an item that they can use on a very daily basis, and that was something that like I kind of intimately made, and then they're able to kind of use it in whatever capacity that they needed. So each of my family members has their own kind of spoon, and so it came out of that want and need, and it's been something that I've been kind of excited in exploring further. I was lucky enough to have an exhibition at the Rooms, part of their, I believe it's called their Present Tense series, which was looking at artists working throughout the pandemic. And in that, it was kind of about spoon carving, except for instead of showing the spoons, because for me it was those spoons, when they were made, they were meant to be used, so I gave them away to people.
Oh, cool.
But in that exhibition, it was just this giant table of all of the offcuts of the spoons. So every little bit of wood that kind of broke off, or a spoon that cracked halfway through, or whatever it was, and there was just this mound of stuff that was kind of the discards of that spoon.
I think I actually saw a photo maybe from that exhibit. Is it still up at the Room?
No, that one was up. Gosh, I don't even remember when it was up. It was a while ago, but it's down now. It was on that kind of level 2.5, that's kind of in between space.
Yeah.
So it was over there. But yeah, it was a fun thing to kind of explore and look at.
That's really cool. I mean, there's something that almost feels oxymoronic about carving a spoon, because like spoons are so smooth and so they seem so uncarved.
Yeah.
In my mind, that I'm curious about sort of. You would need, I guess you'd probably need to practice a little bit before you.
Yeah, the first spoon that I made, it functioned.
Cool. Yeah.
But it wasn't necessarily anything fantastic. Eventually it became a lot more about like the shape and the ergonomics of it and balance and all these other things that just make it like fun to use, kind of the same way that I find when you buy like pottery from a local maker.
Yeah,
like it's more engaging to use and think about, and like having a meal off of that versus off of some plate from IKEA. Totally. It means a lot more to do that because there was thought and kind of care that went into that thing that you're using. Mm-hmm. So it was a very similar relationship, I think.
One thing that's sort of nice related to that, I find, in Newfoundland, there are quite a few potters who make mugs, but they don't make handles on the mugs. So then I know a lot of people with mugs that are handmade, and they're really beautiful, but those same people carry around like a cloth so that they can hold the mug.
Because it's just the heat transfer.
Yeah, they're like, the handle was useful, but like they love the mug so much that they're like, okay, I'm going to add sort of an object so that I can keep using this mug on my day-to-day commute kind of thing, which I think I saw a friend doing that yesterday at the university, and I was like, it's really nice, because it's also like Newfoundland is small enough that you kind of know who made the mug a lot of the time. And that's, I mean, that's something that's really special about here as well, this sort of sense of having access to the work of others and the recognition of that work. What you said really struck me about how when you started making art, when the pandemic started, you sort of stopped to wonder, or like you paused to consider what it's towards or what it's for? I had the exact same experience. Like I was doing my a creative writing master's at U of T, and I'd finished a draft of a novel, and I was just about to defend it as a thesis. And then as soon as that happened, I was like, this novel is written towards a future that no longer exists, like in the same way. Not that the future doesn't exist, but like the specifics of it. And it really, I don't know, it really made me stop and think like, what am I supposed to do with this? I think at this moment, you know, it's been a really interesting moment for the arts in the sense that that's one thing, and you know, maybe it's changed. It's also kind of a moment where the arts are needed more than ever to help people cope. But it's also this moment where, you know, maybe not right now, but the first year of the pandemic, how do I even explain this? It's a bit of a tangent, but you made me think about it. So, like, I subscribe to The New Yorker and stuff like that, right? So it went from this magazine that was all about things that are happening right now to this kind of archive where, you know, suddenly all of this visual art that might have been at like the New Whitney or something was being just like photographed and being put online, and now you can actually link all of the art that you would normally only be able to read about or go see if you were there. And the entire New Yorker became this like really funny little kind of scavenger hunt. And I know that since changed, there have been exhibits sort of more pointed towards responding to COVID or just whatever art people are making now. But how do you feel like, sort of as an artist and as an educator, if there's a broad way to answer this, like how the way people have been making things has changed?
In like a broad set, it is a really challenging question because I feel like there was the immediate like pivot of like, okay, I can't go to the studio or I can't be in the collective spaces or have access to these things. So I need to make things, whether it's making things smaller or making things with found materials, or like there was that initial pivot. But I think that the other kind of thing that happened and that it's always been there, but I feel like it was emphasized further, was the importance of art as a way to connect and kind of keep in touch within the community that you exist in and kind of the community that exists beyond that space. And I think, like, thinking back to, like, making spoons, and even for me, printmaking is very much a community-based activity because you do it in printmaking studios that are usually collective spaces.
Right.
And when you can't access those spaces as a collective, you try to find ways to make sure that that shared sense of kind of community is still present and still available. And a lot of the things that I was doing and that kind of I took part in was about kind of making sure that there were opportunities to keep in touch. And so I feel like the pandemic kind of emphasized that need for kind of the importance of community and what it means to like just check in on one another.
Really nice. Yeah, that's a really lovely way to put it. I think that's a really nice thing to focus on as an artist and as someone within the community. Just sort of, like, instead of thinking, oh, we're putting it all on hold for a minute and we're going to return, what are some alternate sort of modes of engagement? And I love this idea that, printmaking, I hadn't really thought about it, but various forms of art, like they do sort of require these collective spaces because the materials you need to do them, I guess, are sort of industrial, and the equipment is not something that people... Yeah,
and I feel like I've always been drawn to printmaking because of its community, kind of the necessity of community. And I know the way that I treat the printmaking studio up at the university, along with Robin Anderson, who's the tech in the Printshop, we really try to foster a safe space for community and make it feel like it's a place that you can come and kind of do your work regardless if it's print or not, because it's a social space, and there's something really lovely about it being a social space. And again, during the pandemic, that kind of the ease of of that sense of community went away, so there was a need to kind of find more opportunities for it,
Totally.
while also balancing kind of the exhaustion of like the expectation of trying to keep up with all these things too, which was this other like side of the coin.
Totally, yeah. My friend, actually, I think this is at St. Michael's Printshop, but my friend Amory Sanford,
Yep.
you know, yeah, I assumed you would. We both used to live in St. John's, and I think I met her. She was doing that same residency
Yep.
at the Printshop, and we were in a band together, and we would just like the three of us would just go up there after a rehearsal, and I was like, this is so nice, like to be in this really inspiring space, but then also other artists were there as well, and it was very chill. It's like we weren't there to always specifically do one thing, but it was like a really nice sort of organic mode of community, which I think it's hard to really plan for that. Like it's like you have those spaces and they integrate sort of relationally, but it's very different than saying like, hey, let's go for a coffee at 2 p.m. and like, you know, catch up. It's a really nice mode of sort of community.
There's a need to make those spaces feel kind of like these safe, welcoming things where you don't have to be a printmaking expert to kind of go there. You don't have to know what printmaking is to kind of experience it for the first time, and regardless of kind of what level of printmaker you are, or whether or not you're an artist, it's a space that anyone can kind of feel welcomed and kind of comfortable within. And that does take a lot of kind of active work from the folks that work at those spaces and kind of board and artists that participate in it. So it is very much kind of a communal effort to make it feel that way, to hopefully kind of allow for people to kind of engage in it in various manners.
Totally, yeah. I think it's one of those things that like it just seems like, oh, it's just there, but then there's so much work and care and consideration and like cleaning and organizing and all these things that go into sort of keeping up those spaces. No, that's a really nice sort of reminder. Do you feel like now that things are, changing with COVID, like things are sort of, we're still in a very, stressful moment.
Yeah.
But what would you sort of say to young artists and maybe students kind of moving from a place as a student into a space as an artist? Like you mentioned early in the interview how one of the sort of challenges for students is figuring out how to move from, being a student into saying they're an artist. And now some of those sort of tools have been laterally reconstructed in a way. Do you have any advice to sort of young artists trying to figure it out right now?
Yeah, I feel like besides like constantly making and like being active, I think there was actually to stop me from saying that, there's just as much merit to taking a pause and taking a break as there is to like constantly be making. So I feel like there is a balancing act and like not burn yourself out, because I think a lot of arts folks, not specific to visual arts, but just arts folks in general, is often kind of fall into kind of these modes of exhaustion just because of how much labor is involved in all these, and like especially the invisible labor that goes into it.
Totally.
But in terms of advice, I think the thing for me has always been the finding and kind of participating in the communities that exist. Because there's so much support in those spaces, whether that support is kind of for the practical ways of making it, or whether that's to kind of lean on someone when you're having a rough go and you don't find kind of that you have like the creative motivation to do stuff. Or perhaps you're applying for your first exhibition or your first grant and you need kind of just advice on how to go about those application processes, because each of them kind of requires you to kind of wear a different hat in terms of how you present yourself to make sure you have the best opportunity to be kind of rewarded those things. So for me, it's always been kind of everything kind of comes back to that sense of community and having support within that. So whether that means finding a particular mentor or just a group of folks. I know when I graduated my undergrad, the very first year, I didn't go on to my MFA right away. And that in that first year, me and a couple others kind of created a little crit group where we would just get together for drinks once a month or once every other month and just talk about our ideas and what we're working on, just to kind of have that continuation of what the university provided, because we constantly had that community and that presence
Yeah.
on an ongoing basis. And then all of a sudden, when you graduated, that went away unless you kind of found a new one or started one kind of before you left. And so I found that particularly helpful for me. And I would imagine it might be helpful for others too.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a really nice point. It's like the second you sort of finish the education process, you know, unless you do those things, it's easier to feel sort of cast out into
Yeah.
I know, as you know, someone who's been mostly the younger but becoming the older person in these, like when I was younger, I'd be like, can I ask people who are 15 years older than me like how to write this grant application or whatever? And yeah, you can, like, absolutely. Like people who have experience in the arts like want to impart that and want to help younger people. And I think it's important for people to understand that, because now you know, I'm 30, so it's just starting to sort of shift where, you know, 20-year-olds are like, can you help me do this thing? And I'm like, oh, I would love to. Like, thank you for asking. But I think it's important for any sort of, anyone sort of emerging or starting to make art and trying to bring it into the community, whether it's music or visual or whatever, to know that, you can definitely just ask people for help.
Absolutely. And I think like one of the things to think for folks to remember is it's not always just a matter of like the folks that are older that have that wisdom to kind of share, but everyone can be a teacher and everyone can be a student.
Yeah, that's nice.
Right? So there's always things that can be learned from, like I learn from my students all the time.
Totally.
And yeah, so it's constantly kind of this reciprocal kind of action. And again, when you're a part of that community, that becomes easier to just create opportunities for that to happen and those exchanges to happen. But yeah, the first time to ask for advice is a really daunting thing. So hopefully in a lot of the work that I try to do is kind of taking down those barriers to make that first step not challenging, to make sure that there's as many opportunities to ask for advice, whether it's introducing people to folks that might be helpful to them, or making sure that I'm available as much as I can be, so that way people would never hesitate to come out and be like, hey, I'm applying to this, can you give me some advice?
Yeah, totally. Just sort of being open to that. No, that's really nice. Yeah, I think that's sort of a good place to land for today. I mean, but before we go, I just wanted to sort of make our audience aware of any way to see anything coming up, any of your work, I know you mentioned the students are presenting at the Arts and Culture this year.
So for this year, Rotary Art Center has their exhibition schedules have been like blowing up recently, which is amazing. So for this year's student exhibition, we actually looked to the Arts and Culture Center just because of how many amazing things are on the go here. And so that opens on March 7th to the public. We haven't officially decided if there's going to be an opening just yet. We're going to wait until a little bit closer to the day, just seeing how things go.
Yeah, for sure.
But that'll be March 7th to March 25th. And it's just, if you walk in the main floor, kind of just behind the theater, there's kind of that little gallery space.
Cool.
So that exhibition is called Intangible. And that one's curated by myself and two students, Georgia Dawkin and Gayatri Sukantha Morgan. And so that's going to be up. I think there's 12 artists from the university who are current students and alumni that will be participating. So it's bound to be quite exciting.
That's awesome. Gaia, you mentioned Gaia as well. Yeah, she actually has a solo exhibition here right now.
She's so Gaia and Rebecca Fever are in the Rotary Art Center right now, and that's a really awesome show, which is also quite topical with the pandemic and all that stuff too.
Totally, yeah. So if anyone wants to check that out, that's great as well. So March 7th to 21st, it's going to be running? 25th, okay, at the Arts and Culture. And also, do you know the dates of this residency in Port Hope?
Port Union.
Oh, sorry, Port Union.
I forget the exact dates, but it's end of April to end of May-ish. I think it's like the last week of April to just before the last week of May.
Right.
So we'll be up in Port Union then and doing our thing. And so yeah, if you're in the Bonavista Vista Peninsula area and things like that, swing by. Port Union's a beautiful place, and the Union House Arts is just incredible there.
Yeah, it seems, my friend just did something there and it seems really cool. Awesome. Okay, thanks so much. Andrew Testa, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thanks to Brad and Noah and the RAC. I'm Aley. Have a great day.